Everyone, and a massive welcome to episode 2 of The Ultimate Hack with me, Simon Linstead, host and founder of the InfoSec Live community, and my good friend, Luther Chip Harris, sitting here on the right-hand side with a mask over his face. And for those of you that don't know why that is the case, Chip, please explain to our audience why you're wearing a mask.
The reason why I wear a mask is I got doxxed about 2 going on 3 years ago, and it was actually done by a state nation. And when that state nation came for me, they doxed me, my family, my wife, my kids, my dog. I mean, they just doxed everything. Doxing, for people that don't know, is they try to gather as much information about you as possible to build a compromise. And compromise means compromising data that they can use to against like your credit rating, whatnot, to take like a jump drive and plug it into a government computer or a system or whatever it may be, and they steal the data, and that they won't publish your dirty little secrets, or your dirty laundry onto the internet. And one day, after this started happening, and it's happened to a lot of people before, that's been in the public eye, was I found out that there was a government hack and some of my information was stolen, and I had written a white paper, and that white paper had leaked out onto the public internet. And the country that actually wanted to have me deported and to face charges in their country for supposedly hacking their IT and their OT systems, when they had been doing it to the United States for years.
It's
So it
different.
was just yeah, so it was kind of like a punch back to them. And then I had the U.S. Marshal Service, my JAG lawyer, my regular lawyer, the Department of Defense, and a guy in digital camo all show up my door, and my wife answers the door and she's like, "Honey, they're here for you." So I come downstairs, and we sit around my table, and they say, "Yeah, Interpol has got a red notice, and they want you deported back to this nation state, and we're going to tell them to stick it where the sun doesn't shine, because that's not going to happen, because we're not going to deport a national to a or to a foreign national country that's starts with INA, and INA decided that I needed to face charges in their country, and they said no, and I had to go in and wash all my digital media, like my LinkedIn, my Facebook,
That
and
that
like
must
I
that
don't.
must have been a huge job, Chip.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I had to change everything. Like, I mean, I had to go through new social security numbers, new driver's license, new, I mean, had to redo my mortgage on my house, they had to monitor my credit score. I mean, had to do my taxes quarterly. I mean, it was just a mess, and then I had to, and I also had to do it for my wife and for my parents and my
Of course.
grandparents. So, I mean, it took, a year to get everything straight. Like, I couldn't buy a car, I couldn't finance anything, I couldn't have a credit card, because I had to go through all of these checks and balances to make sure that my data and my privacy was not basically
And that's
compromised.
that's super unfair. I mean, for those that know my story, I mean, I've been super successful. I've also been a super failure. So I went bankrupt a few years ago. So I know,
Mhm.
I know what it's like to not be able to get credit and not be able to get a car. But for me, that was well deserved. But for someone like yourself who's been doxxed, that
Right.
seems extremely unfair. I suppose more fair than being exported to a nation state, perhaps, though, which would have been
Yeah,
really crap.
they're like, we're not putting handcuffs on you and sending you to,
I know.
to INA, to face charges. And I was like, okay, that's good to know. That's awesome.
Well, look.
Thanks.
That's I think
Thanks, guys.
I think that's a roundup for everyone to know why you're wearing a mask. And I can tell you off camera here, he is a very dashingly handsome young man. So you
Yeah, I
have to
have a
take my
face
word
for
for that.
radio. I have a face for radio, but not, a face for television.
It's not. It's
I'm
simply,
glad my wife loves me.
simply not true. But look, for those of you watching, we've got quite a few tuned in already. As usual, we've gone off topic, so I'll draw it back to the whole point. The whole point of
Sure.
this is episode 2 of the Ultimate Hack. Chip went through a couple of weeks ago, prior to my vacation last week, went through some IoT security tips and tricks. Also talked about the industry as a whole and what issues there are out there. Today, I know Chip has got a set format of stuff to go through. However, you'll be pleased or not pleased to know that we've been having a chat beforehand, and there's quite a lot of stuff going on in the news at the moment. And I'd like to take advantage of having someone with Chip's experience live on the show, and I want to talk about a T word today, Chip, before we get started.
Let's
And
get the pink elephant out of the room, okay,
let's get
everybody?
it out of the room. So again, anyone watching, please jump in. I want to make this interactive. Jump in with your comments. I'll pick up questions as and when we can. And for those of you who don't know, the InfoSec Live community is a free community of nearly 3,000 cyber professionals, all sharing best ideas and practice. And I will drop the link in the chat later for anyone who isn't a member to come and join. But let's get that pink elephant out in the room, Chip. So Twitter, what's going on?
Well, it's relatively simple to say that one of the old school hackers that's been around forever, that was a part of the Loft and Cult of the Dead Cow. This goes back way into the '90s. They testified in front of like Fred Smith and a bunch of people, that were congressmen, and told them, like, hey, the internet, is not necessarily secure. Privacy doesn't really exist. We could turn the internet off. These horrible things right now could be done, and we need to start looking at, privacy issues for one. Privacy is a very good thing. How we're going to protect user data, how we're going to protect our intellectual property, and then how that's going to be regulated, and how that's going to be looked at. Well, with Twitter today, as anybody's watching the news, they had a whistleblower, and he has come forward and put together an 87-page document explaining all the stuff and the evil things that they had done. They had multiple people with admin accounts. They had multiple people that had lied to their board of directors, and covered stuff up about financial records and findings to the board, which is really bad. Which goes back to what I said last time that we talked, was about the brutal honesty and transparency that we as practitioners have to give,
Yeah.
and sometimes you got to tell somebody that your baby's ugly. I mean, there is plastic surgery, but if your eyes are going one way and going the other, we can realign that and get rid of the cleft palate, and fix the nose and the ears, to where they're actually lining up with each other. I mean, yeah, as I tell people, it's sometimes you just have to go, ooh, this is bad. Ooh, this is really ugly. And we got to fix it, and that is basically what he is doing, because, he is seeing, or has seen and has documented, and has now turned that over to the federal government, that Twitter can be weaponized. It's got bots, it's got all this stuff, that Elon Musk, before, he's been talking about the purchase thereof, but he said, like, look, I gotta have transparency and see what's actually inside this before it's, I don't want to buy a broken product. I don't blame him. I mean, would you want to buy something that's not working? And
No.
it is a public platform. Everyone does have a voice, but it can be used for psyop warfare. It can be used to sway elections and sway opinions on things, because what the eye see and the ears hear, the mind will
Well,
believe.
let me jump in quickly because in true lifestyle, my 13-year-old has just walked in the room and I'm going to grab him on camera and I want to move off Twitter and I want to move off Twitter quickly because this lad here who's wearing my sunglasses, yeah, come here. He he is on TikTok a lot, right?
Right.
And I've had discussions. This is Jude, by the way. I've had discussions with Jude about TikTok safety. Can you just give him a couple of minutes on why TikTok's so bad, Chip?
Well, if first off, TikTok, all of their servers are in China. They mine data and they track you and your usage patterns. They use that data and metadata to build a profile around you, and then they try to basically compromise you and keep feeding you data for what you're clicking on. So let's say you're looking at stuff about, let's say white nationalists, or domestic terrorism or something, video like Alex Jones junk. I mean, just crazy UFO stuff. They keep feeding you
You've been
that
watching. You've been
same.
looking at my internet history.
Yeah, I mean, they keep feeding you that crazy, nonsense data about, white nationalism and, Black Lives Matter, all these all these things that are basically popular, and very expressive talking points. And they use that and they can weaponize that to sway your opinion, whether it be good or bad. Now, I am politically agnostic, because I've told people, in the past, they say, well, what do you think about this political issue or this political issue or this? When you are, be political, which I blame both of the parties in our United States, and
Yeah, same here. Yeah.
you untether yourself and you look at things logically, and with reason, and you can, point fingers at both and saying, well, that's good that they did there and that's bad that they did there, and you really kind of form your own opinion instead of the talking heads on television or CNN or Fox News or whatever. They keep feeding you, that kind of information. So if you like cats, they're going to keep feeding you information about cats. If you
Yeah.
like dogs, they're going to keep feeding you dogs. If you're looking up stuff about what happened at Charlottesville, they're going to keep feeding you data, and hate mongering and, all kinds of crazy stuff. And that's not regulated. So there's no censorship, or there's no forum to take that content to where it doesn't affect your child. There, I mean,
Completely
anybody
agree.
can see it and anybody can look at it because it's on the public domain. So, this is where privacy really matters. This is where, you don't want young children looking at these things and seeing this kind of stuff. So, it is, up to you, the parent, of course, to be able to help
Well,
monitor
it's
those
funny. It's
things.
funny you should say that, but I've avoided getting any of my children on the internet for like forever, and I've just
Yeah.
realised I've got my 13-year-old son half naked on here with me now, so I'm going to get him to leave the room. Thanks, Jude. But no, thanks, Chip. I mean, I think TikTok itself is a horrendous thing. I've seen a couple of posts on
Y-
LinkedIn about it
you know,
recently, where so,
I don't care.
someone actually said that you can't just tell people not to use it. You're going to have to think of other
Yeah.
ways around it. Well, I kind of agree with everything else in cybersecurity, but when you look at the depth of the malicious intent around TikTok, I wonder how we can condone people to use that.
Well, I look at it as, I don't care about your dance videos or the new dance craze you do on TikTok in your, bedroom, fully dressed, trying to dance and do all that. I look at who owns that content. Where does the content go?
Yeah.
Who has own? I put this in air quotes. Who has ownership, of that data, right? And how is that being used? How is that being mined? Is it being sold to advertisers? Is it being sold to nation states? Is it being sold to, a spy agency
Well, that,
somewhere? I
that brings
mean,
us on to Oracle, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, I mean,
they've been in the press the last couple of days as well about, I mean, how many records, how much information did they
it
have?
just tons. And you
Yeah,
say to yourself, what are your stop gaps to, protect me? What are you doing to protect Moa here to make sure that my intellectual property and data is taken care of? And we don't really have privacy or privacy, as you would say, when it comes down to internet uses, what you can click on, what you cannot click on, whatnot.
right.
I mean, there's been people, and there. I'm a firm believer in free internet. I'm a firm believer in, what, the ACL puts out there about the internet. I'm a firm believer what the Electronic Frontiers Foundation does. And I really believe in free speech. I don't believe in censorship. I really don't. I think that you should be able to say and do whatever you want to if you have that public forum, and you have that right to be able to do that. There's some countries, they ain't got it as good as we do here, either in
Yeah, I
England or the
agree.
United States. I mean, they
Yeah.
can't, there are governments that mine that data and find those dissidents, and, and they put them in jail or gulags or kill them, and there's, I'm a firm believer that, you should have that inalienable right to own your own data. Now, that's a very big sticking point, and a political sticking point here in the United States, because, well, you clicked on that EULA agreement, so, congratulations, we now own your information, and you're giving that up into the public domain, and
Do you think we're
um,
ever going to get to a point where we own our own data?
hopefully so, because this goes back to like a bunch of the Hollywood actors and so forth. They have a right to privacy. Their job as an actor, right? Being in a movie, whatnot. But they have private lives too. Same thing with politicians. Politicians, they're there to do the people's will. Whether some people like it or not. You still should be able to have your own privacy,
Yeah,
around your own data and around your own life. They, and the thing though too is we stream a lot of our political views, our, personal views, our opinions and stuff out there that can now be used against you. I mean, there are
yeah,
people get fired because they put a social media post up talking about something, and somebody on a school board, or somebody didn't like it and they lost their job,
yeah,
or they, I mean, and lost their employment, based around their social media posts because of their own political views, which has nothing to do with the company, as long as the company wasn't being represented. But they got let go because guess what? They had a view that was their own, and they shared that. and then they used that against them. Someone used that against them and took them to HR and said, "Hey, this person, has these radical views about blah 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 blah, and has nothing to do with the company, nothing to do with their work or their progress, but guess what? They get let go." And because they posted something on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatnot. So, I've had to, really kind of tone back a lot of my social media presence, and that's the reason why I have to wear the mask, is because there's great facial recognition software that's out there by INA, and I don't want them to know who or where I am, and that's the reason why I've got multiple firewalls and proxies that I have to hide behind, because I don't want them to find me on the internet. I should have a right to privacy. I should have a right to be able to do my job online. I should be able to watch and stream videos and movies, whether they be, explicit or not, in my own privacy in my own home, and not be judged by that. So, and that all boils down to accountability, the accountability of the user to know what they're doing and what they're clicking on, because, that is their choice. That is their free will. That's the only thing that you really have left in life is free will.
We
But,
don't seem to have any I mean, whether it's by our own fault through sharing everything online, but the whole privacy thing, I mean, in reality now, Chip, we have very little of that, do we? I
right.
mean, you can easily find out where someone lives, where they frequent, where they go, and I think it's a bit Orwellian now, going back to the
It is.
book
It
by
is.
George
And
Orwell. I mean, there's massive positives to it in the right hands, and
right.
again, as we're saying, in the wrong hands, it's weaponized, isn't it? And that's kind of what's happening with Twitter. I mean, you look at the state of politics. We won't talk about politics because I'm, completely bipartisan. Really, I don't have a party that I follow, but I don't think in your country or in mine at the moment that either of the parties have got it anywhere near right. And
I
it's a
would have to
bit of a
agree,
concern.
because I mean, I look at the social issues as an issue. We should have clean water, we should have great public education, we should have, some very much inalienable things that, should be given to us as a peoples. We pay taxes and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff. And, in the United States, we just passed a sweeping information, information and infrastructure act,
yeah,
which has been really good, because our infrastructure is 30 years old here in the United States and it's been failing. Same thing is that, I don't want a company like Cambridge Analytica,
mm,
that did exist, to
yeah,
troll and trove all my data and metadata and use me as a statistic, or some kind of like going, and mining my data to sell to advertisers. I mean, I don't want that to happen.
no,
And we've done great things with the internet, and we've done some horrible things with the internet. And as I tell people, it's like, if you want to go to 4chan, that's all on you. That is your right. And if you want to go look at, stuff and do research, that's great, because I mean, the internet was really created with certain things that was just so awesome back in the day, that
yeah.
now are being used and abused. And I think that that's incredibly wrong. I think there's a way that we could change that without having to censor the internet as much as some people want to. And I don't believe that there should be some kind of oversight, for that. I think it boils down to is that we've got to change our computing habits, and
I
then
think
we've
that
got to
the
change.
problem we've got is the oversight at the moment is the people who own the companies where people are on the platforms, isn't it? And
Yeah,
I suppose that's
it's
the
all
problem
about
we keep
money. I mean,
talking about.
your records online are about $250.
Yeah,
So, or at least roughly about 300 and something pounds, in your world. And you can buy those on the internet. I can buy someone's, on the dark net. I mean, I can buy someone's, credit card information. I can buy people's,
oh well, look
aggregate
at check
data.
check this out, right? So talking about data protection, we went away to Greece on holiday last week,
Hmm.
and the first thing they asked us to do, I'll find a picture of it when we got to the hotel, was can you please fill in our book? It's like, okay, have
Mm.
a look at the book. Pass me the book. The book was a list
Ah.
a list of names, addresses, and passport numbers.
Hmm.
And there was 60 pages of this information. I wrote in
Right.
the book, but I may have changed a couple of the digits in each passport just because I didn't want my details on there. But
Right.
the scariness of how freely available that information was in a, a European hotel that's under GDPR regulations. You wouldn't think, we're talking about digital data, but
Mhm.
let's not forget there's still an awful lot of data laying around that we can pick up as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this for years about healthcare records, and you're in a couple shows that we've actually done.
Mm,
Is that your healthcare records have your credit score, where you live, your social security number. I mean,
yep,
who's your, healthcare provider. I mean, and all that stuff, can be purchased. If it's stolen on the internet. So that when you're losing records, you're losing part of your digital personality,
yep,
your digital life, I mean, and is it getting better? I don't see it right now. I see it getting a lot more worse. But sometimes it has to get really bad before people wake up and say, okay, we need to do something to change this, and that's either by, an action of the user themselves, or, you know, um, casting a vote possibly, or looking at something. Cause, my child, wants a cell phone, 10 years old, wants a cell phone.
yeah,
And daddy has said, no,
yeah.
you will not be getting one for a while. Because I mean, I have seen many videos of people, that are pedophiles, that that hunt down children using Minecraft and using Roblox, and using social media apps, to be able to lure them, into illicit photos and so forth. I mean, I've worked some of those cases before for sexting cases, as well as some of those cases that have been on the internet, and it takes a while to get that stuff taken off, that content taken off, when you have to do a cease and assist letter to an ISP, and to a provider. I mean, and it gets scary, and it gets legal, and it gets very convoluted sometimes, because I mean, sometimes people don't know cybersecurity laws, and some people don't know, the chain of custody of how that all works out. So there's a lot of different things, and the forensics is involved with it too. Because I mean, you sometimes have to prove that you are you on the internet, and
Yeah,
it's a hard thing to do,
it is.
uh,
Yeah,
and it's really hard to protect, thy data. As I tell people, my golden rule with any company I've ever worked for is my job is to protect your data. Because if that data leaks out, there's a monetary number that's attached to it that could be used against you, and then you've got to deal with, oh, we've been breached. And when we've been breached, now we have regulators coming in saying audit. And then this is
you're
what's
in
going
trouble.
to happen to Twitter.
Yeah,
Twitter is, the DOJ, they don't play around. I mean, the Security and Exchange Commissions, if you've lied on stuff with dealing with money and collateral, and they're going to show up, and you're going to be carted in front of, Congress. At least some of these higher ups are, and they're going to have to answer some serious questions
yeah, it's going to be
about,
uncomfortable.
oh yeah, I mean, they would be dragged into either a British court, or they'd be dragged into a US court saying, "Okay, Jack Dorsey, tell me the reason why you didn't know this was happening."
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
why did your cybersecurity administrator lie on these forms, or lie about this stuff? Why is it this was misreported wrong? And they sometimes have to really dig deep and go, well, I'm going to pull a Zuckerberg. I didn't know this was happening in my company.
I
Oh,
think
what
that's
do
all
I?
I think that's all he can say, but it's not a
Yeah,
defense, is it? That's the problem. I just
yeah.
wanna
I mean,
pick up on something Greg said. I mean, going back to the data, Greg mentioned, you're a gold mine. Data is the new gold, and
mhm,
not to speak that no one knows what the app can read or take from the smartphone back to TikTok, which is absolutely right. And I think
mhm,
moving forward with the metaverse as well, it then brings forth a whole load of new personal data, doesn't it?
right.
And then it's when it gets really, really scary, I think. And Greg's asked a question there with the impressive achievements in facial recognition and the social, let me get up, social point system in the country that should not be named, INA. Do you think that this will be a template that will be adopted?
I think yes, in a way, yes, it can be weaponized and used, and that's why I'm kind of like, okay, we're talking about the metaverse now. We're talking about going into a 3D digital, basically, virtual environment like a game. What is the cybersecurity that's protecting me as that person inside the metaverse? Or I've seen that, even on news, there's companies that are buying virtual real estate, which just
Yeah,
boggles my mind,
I know.
that are building virtual buildings and meeting rooms and stuff like
But
that.
Chip,
I mean,
my children have been conditioned for this for the last
yeah,
15 years. You go
Mhm.
back, I mean, not that far, but probably 10 years ago, you had coins on Clash of Clans. I remember one
Mhm.
before I knew anything about security, my Apple account was linked to my son's. He spent, you don't want to know how much money on gems one weekend. So there's
Mhm.
there's that conditioning that they used to buying stuff that isn't real. You've then
Right.
got, I suppose, Fortnite, where again, one of my children has paid money for skins where they make themselves look better online. And it's as
That's
though
right.
we've now been teed up for this. So my children don't see anything wrong with buying completely things with no tangible benefits whatsoever. In their minds, it's worth it. And I
Right.
think that's the concern, isn't it? Society's been primed for Web3 or whatever you want to call it, and it's horrifying in my mind. I mean, there's so many good aspects to it. The
Mhm.
medical uses, the social uses if done properly, but there's so much potential malevolent intent there as well.
I mean, I think that having a digital office would be cool,
Yeah,
and the meetings, and stuff like that. But it's like, Teams has had issues, Zoom's had issues, Slack's had issues, you know, um, Discord's had issues. I mean, and then what's the security protocols that they're doing to fix those things? And are they fixing those things?
yeah,
The accountability factor. So that's where, like in today's lesson, is, are you being accountable and transparent for a lot of the stuff that you're actually reporting, and that documentation process, because there's no assumptions, as I tell people. If you were my boss and I have to report to you cybersecurity instances that are happening within the company, right? So we've got our little make believe company, and let's say we've got about 150 people that are remote users, because everybody wants to be in a hybrid work based environment. And inside the office, they're perfectly safe. But when they go outside the office, and they're on maybe a non-encrypted VPN, or,
yeah.
whatnot, or maybe they're using their personal computer at home versus their work
McDonald's
computer.
Wi-Fi. Yeah,
Yeah. All right. McDonald's Wi-Fi or Starbucks Wi-Fi, you know, those protections, are things that we've really got to start taking a look at, because those are introducing new vectors of attack into the environment. So, as I tell people, it boils around, first off, you got to have your asset management. You got to know what you've got to protect. So if you don't have a good asset inventory, of what's floating around out there, you can't protect what you don't know you have. And that's always hard, because that is inventory. I mean, that is knowing who's got what computer and then what applications are on it. Same thing, how well is your active directory set up, because systems administrators sometimes are naturally lazy, and they clone accounts or they clone profiles. And same thing, I said, if you want to start a nightmare, go scan your network for open file shares and just see what happens. Like,
yeah,
see who's got connectivity to what, without permissions or with permissions. So yeah, and I propose these things to companies because, I mean, these are some of the safeguards that you've got to use to protect people like me, because that's what hackers are going to look for. Is they're going to look for a way to get into that company. Now, Twitter's been hacked before, and when Twitter got hacked before, they were socially engineered by two teenagers that got a hold of somebody that had administrative account credentials. Okay, first off, there's only should be maybe 3 or 4 people that have got full admin rights, and people should not have full admin rights to their machine if they're in a work environment. That would
no,
be one of the first things I would set up with our company, is to make sure that those checks and balances are taken care of, because that's the first things that's going to be audited, right? So, are the user accounts set up correctly? Are people in the right groups? Do we have our file shares locked down correctly? Is our AD cleaned up? Then I take a look at, email, because what is the number one vector of attack right now is
yeah,
email systems. So is our Office 365 or our Exchange, or, Thunderbird or whatever you're using on the Linux side, is that set up correctly? And making sure that we have our security protocols and stuff that are set up in there. And that could also be around third party products. Are you using Okta? Are you using two-factor authentication? And Microsoft authentication or Google authentication. How are you making sure that your users are users, and not bots, or so forth? Are you using Capula based services, and the first question I also ask is a company is like, hey, how many WebEx portals or web portals do you have that come into the company? and sometimes they say, oh, two or three, and that two or three turns into like 20 after it's all
Yeah.
said and done. So it's
But
like,
ones that have been set up and then forgotten about, I suppose.
right. I mean,
Yeah.
they just fall by the wane, because we're no longer using that. We're using Zooms. But guess what? It's still actively on the network and the system because guess what? We just totally forgot about it. It's been 2 or 3 years. And then somebody that's snorting and sniffing the network and, looking, for vulnerabilities and inroads to be able to do that, they use as a vulnerability to pivot into the system.
Yeah.
So, and we now, I mean, like I get 200 to 300 emails a day. I mean, literally. I mean, so, it's gotten to that point, with email systems, especially if they got macros involved with them, if it's an Excel spreadsheet or a database, those things can, have viruses linked into them or remote access tools linked into them. I was talking this morning with a friend of mine, where his CTO, accidentally clicked on something and installed a rat program, a remote access tool. And I was like, well, was it bloatware? Was it installed on the computer when he got it? Or was it something? Well, we found out he had full admin rights to his local machine. And so he just clicked on something and it just automatically
Yeah.
installed. And
It's
then
that simple.
there you go. It's just that simple. And now they're bare metaling his machine out, changing all his passwords, recreating his profiles,
I suppose
all that kind of stuff.
it relates to the buzzword written on my hat, doesn't it? I suppose. Although I should say a thank you
Yeah.
to Appgate there for the free hat from San Francisco this year. Thanks for that. I'm going to start shouting out all the free T-shirts I've got from the conferences because I feel bad. I'm wearing them every day now, Chip.
Yeah, because I mean, I understand zero trust, but zero trust is sometimes hard to do,
Yeah,
depending on the company, and we are hopefully going to a better security model for not only our app development, but for our web development, and for locking down our websites and then locking down, our security systems. So, like for me, I don't even have a Twitter account. I don't have an Instagram account. I don't
me neither.
have TikTok. I don't have any of that stuff. I just basically have like Facebook, LinkedIn. That's all I need. Because guess what? That's how I keep in friends, keep in touch with friends like you in England and Australia
Yeah,
and New Zealand and other countries, and the friends and family. And then LinkedIn, I use professionally, as a professional and IT professional and post stuff on there and repost stuff on there that actually has validity to the things that I believe in. So I even posted today that there was a hospital that got hacked, and I was like going, man, I've been screaming about this for years. And, they're now having to reroute people to another hospital because they're basically in a crypto locker, situation
we've
where
had
they,
it here in the UK. The NHS Wales
yeah.
got hacked, I think 3 weeks ago, and their
Mhm.
appointment booking systems, all sorts, were completely offline for 3 weeks, and it took 2 weeks before they told anyone as well.
Right.
Unsurprisingly.
And, we now have laws that are, enacted here in the United States that if you've been, had a major cybersecurity breach, that you have to report that, to the
Is it
Department of
three
Homeland
days,
Security.
isn't it? I think
Yeah,
72
3
hours.
days.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. I mean, I suppose it leads us on to the insurance part, if you don't mind jumping onto that, because we had
No problem.
Lloyd's of London come out 2 weeks ago to say that no acts of war, or by should I say nation states, are going to be covered. Well, that's massive news. I haven't seen much of it in the cyber press or the infosec press, but from having worked in the insurance industry for 25 years, the thoughts going through my head are we're now going to see a whole new load of jobs come up for forensic investigators working on behalf of insurance companies to get out of these claims for a start. So I suppose for job seekers, there's some new opportunities. But again, it will be how can you prove where the hacker was from? How can you prove it was a nation state? It seems like such a grey area to me, Chip, or have I got that completely wrong?
It is a very gray area because, as I tell people, insurance is a bunch of money that you put a glass box over,
Yeah,
and you only break the glass when bad things happen. And you take that money away and out, and then you
yeah,
put another glass, you put more money back into it, and then put another glass, box on top of it. And you only use the money that you've used to recover, your losses. It is going to be a very fickle thing right now because it's like, okay, you're going to have to use software or a third party to prove this. So, especially in the insurance world, it's all about, reliability, and
yeah.
liability. So, were your systems set up correctly with, level one, level two, and level three, on your network? Did you have, they're going to go down a checklist. Did you have these things set up to where, let's say, Russia,
Do
tries
you
to
know what the
attack?
real problem? Do you know what the real problem is, though? At the moment, the way companies are being assessed for their insurance is through self checkbox.
Yeah, that's not going to work. That's
Mm.
the, you
And
got to
it and it and
have,
it's not gonna work, and I
it's
think there's lots
not.
of
Yeah.
people out there at the moment who think they've got cover because they've
Yeah.
ticked boxes, but they're gonna have a nasty surprise should they ever put a claim in.
Yeah, and that's the you can't self-regulate yourself if you're going to lie to yourself.
No.
So it goes back to truth, transparency, and brutal honesty again. Is that if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we might have to spend money to get out of this situation that we're in. Right? We need
Yeah.
to have better infrastructure, better coding, better secured coding if somebody got in that way. We need to make sure our email systems and these wonderful little things, our mobile devices, are they locked down, as well? Because this is now the new vector of attack. This is your new wallet. This has got all of your personal information. This has got your contact list. This has got your email. This has got your Outlook. I mean, you know, and IoT devices, as I've told people, and bring your own IT devices, sometimes introduce more problems than sometimes they're worth.
I completely agree. And just to touch on Greg's comment there, the assurance went out the window with the cloud when they didn't think the risks through. I think you're right. And then COVID happened. The insurance industry has been woefully ill prepared for cybersecurity for a long time. And I think the last 18 months, we've seen them suddenly pull cover. I mean, the firm I'm working for, I won't divulge figures, but I know it was more than double, I think, for the same cover this year that they got last year. And this is a firm who've got ISO accreditation, not
Hmm.
just ticked boxes, but in a really robust, secure posture. And it's a nightmare jumping through those hoops. And I think again, the way that we kind of are being conditioned to just expect the insurance is going to pay out for the ransomware, and the ransomware people, looking to hack insurance companies to get lists of people who are covered. I think we're
Hmm.
going to start to see some really messy outcomes over the next 12 months. What with the recession that's now going to hit or hitting globally, you're going to see more malicious actors doing this to generate money because they need it. And you're going to see more people cutting corners as well on things because they haven't got the money to pay it, and it creates a perfect storm, I think, for people with malintent to make lots of money.
And it also creates a lot of stress on the practitioners, the the administrators, and puts them more under a microscope. you know and can you self-regulate yourself sometimes, yes or no? And it's like, okay, if we're really 100% brutally truthful with ourselves, here's our weak points and then here's our strong points. And we really need to concentrate on our weak points, is because sometimes we need to educate our users on better computer practicing. Sometimes we
Yeah,
need better switches, get off legacy systems, have better patch management and vulnerability management, and all this, what I call non-sexy kind of work and stuff, has to get done,
the
and
basics. Yeah,
yeah, and honestly, it is. Chris Roberts has talked about this. I mean, tons of people in the industry have talked about this. It goes back to the centralization of how well your infrastructure is built for you and your company.
yeah.
If it's cloud, that's perfectly fine. There's ways to secure cloud all day long. It's just your stuff somewhere else. I mean, that's all it is. But a SQL database, whether it's in the DMZ versus in the cloud, it's still a SQL server,
Yeah.
or it's still or it's still an instance, within the realm, of you having to protect it. So it does go back to basics, which I think we've really forgot. And I think that we really forgot the kindness of customer service in a way,
Yeah.
because we treat sometimes our users like they're idiots, or they don't know, or but maybe they don't know, but this is just impeding on their work, right? And they're looking for us to get a fix, or they're looking for us to get more secure because they don't want that data to leak out, or they don't want something to happen bad to this stuff, and they're very scared about it, because they've been talked and yelled at and screamed and had to go through death by PowerPoint online at least twice a year to say that they went through training, on all this kind of cybersecurity awareness and blah blah. And, there is a human factor that's involved with this, in that we really need to pay attention to what the users are saying, and then take a look at where that market to be able to help those people. So it's like, yeah, we don't want our Tableau data and our Salesforce data floating out in the ether. We need to bring that in. We need to make sure that that's being monitored correctly, and making sure our analytics data and our sales data is being, looked at, and secured very well because, well, that's the bread and butter of the company.
Do you
And if
think
that
it
gets
works?
hacked, how's the cybersecurity insurance going to cover that? It's
It's
like
not.
if you lost everything and now a state nation or a threat actor or a cybersecurity gang now has all your data and it's locked down and you lose all that, what's the monetary figure that you're going to attach to losing your entire system, your entire livelihood, your entire business and your business model? Because they now can just erase the backups, which they're real. That's what they're doing now, and erase all that data that was originally on that server or service or cloud instance, and say, "Nanny, nanny, boo, boo. I've got the keys to the kingdom. You're going to pay me $10 million."
Yeah.
And then you pay the $10 million, you get it all back. You go through all the rigmarole to change everything again, and then you got to file for cybersecurity insurance. They're like, oh, we're not going to pay that because you didn't follow the proper practices because you self-edited yourself and you lied about some of the stuff that you knew that were some of your issues. This is the reason why you got to have a
Twitter.
third party. We need a third party or regulation that would look at that to where you would have either an outside auditing firm or like you do an annual pen test,
Yeah.
to come in and say, how really secure is our, and are we following the best practices to secure this information and data the way that
You,
needs to
you
be
see,
done?
you see again. Considering I work for a pen test company, going to
Mhm.
say something controversial here, but what's the point of having one a year? You know, it's a snapshot in time. I think it need
Mhm.
again that the conversations I've been having with some SMEs recently is the way the industry's marketed. These companies have never touched security before, and you're talking like companies with 100 million turnover, not small, but they just haven't
Mhm.
got security addressed. But in their minds, the first thing they need is a pen test, and they don't get me wrong, they do need a pen test, but they need so much more than that. And it's back to the
Mhm.
education piece, isn't it? Where, like you said at the start, you've got to find out what you've got first before you start testing anything. I would suggest.
And I've said this before is that, when red teamers beat up the blue team really bad, and I mean, they look like they've just gone 20 rounds with Mike Tyson and
Yeah,
Muhammad Ali. You need to come in there and come up with a proactive plan to help
yeah.
fix what
Exactly,
you beat up.
exactly that, and that's my point. And it is a bit of a sales pitch for Bramfit, I suppose, who I'm
Mhm.
working for, because that's what they do. They test and
Mhm.
remediate. And
And the
if
thing though too is also educate. If they
absolutely
didn't know, you
no,
need to tell
and
them.
it's having the blue team involved as well while you're doing the
Right.
test, so they can see in a live environment where the vulnerabilities are, where they're getting the wins, and then help them understand how they can improve that. I think that's such a better approach than traditional, forgive me for saying it, pen tests, where you go along and go, well, that's shit. That's even
Yeah.
shitter. That's shit. You got to fix
Yeah.
all that. See you later. Because I've
And the
seen it.
the proverbial kicking the can down the line is not going to
Yeah,
work anymore.
it's not.
It's
No.
you pay me now, you pay me later, still got to pay me. I mean, I've said that once, and even when I do pen tests, it's like even if I don't get in, I'm still going to find a little bit of something, to
Mm.
give you to go back with because I'm like Evil Knievel. I get paid for the attempt, whether or not. I mean, the
That's
company
one of
gets
my
paid,
favorite
I get paid.
toys. That was Chip. I'm showing my
Yeah.
age now.
I mean, I get paid for jumping over the fountain whether I landed or stick it or not. I mean, guess what? I still get paid.
Yeah,
And that's where, I tell people, yes, it's a snapshot in time, but I also see there has always been a disconnect from, like, let's say the help desk down to the administrators down to, the people that are doing your input of data between the C level sometimes. And you've had many a CISO on a lot of these things. And what do they always say? The number one thing is communication, right?
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
they need to get out of their glass office and get away from that Excel spreadsheet and and just go walk around and talk to people. Go talk and have meetings
And do you know what, Chip?
more than once a month.
They're the successful ones who do
Yeah.
that, who are approachable. People feel like they can go to them with a problem and not feel stupid. And I think again, there's a lot of people in our industry with a lot of talent, but there's also, especially at the C level,
Hmm.
a bit of a gap around the emotional intelligence skills needed, I think. And as the
Right.
industry changes more and more, I think we're going to see a slightly different breed of CISO, like we're seeing already, perhaps.
And I think that is because you're seeing the old guard retire, and you're seeing the
Yeah,
people that have worked their butts off to get to that level. They said, man, if I was sitting in that chair, I'd be talking to folks. I'd
yeah,
be having more than one huge WebEx meeting a month. I would be, meeting with all the managers, and they're like, hey, what are the real problems? Just, don't sugarcoat shit. That's the way I hate to say it that way, but don't sugarcoat it. Tell me the God's honest truth, what our issues are and our problems are, so we can start fixing these things. And I think that's where we're slowly making that change into to where there is more transparency within the systems and the networks, and more transparency within this containerized group. I always said, when I was doing job interviews, I said, well, I asked the first question is like, do you have a containerized environment? Do I get to talk to other teams? Do I get to talk to like the networking team and the development team? And they say, no, we really don't do that. Then I was like, well, I'm probably really not the person for you, because I raise hell. I mean, that's my job. I raise just utter hell with all these people, because if you see something, say something, and then it's got to get
yeah,
fixed, right? So it's like, oh, why is 40 gigs of data being moved every night out of the accounting, into a third party server in Myanmar or Burma, or it's being jumped off Hong Kong and going God knows where, you know, that's some of the stuff that I bring up. Like, oh, why are our firewall rules not set to scan all these other different ports, or why are these ports even on, So I ask a lot of those hard technical questions, because I mean, I know how I would attack that system. Now, other people will do it. And there's also automated software that can do the exact same thing that does,
yeah,
what I do, from clicking the keys and clicking the mouse. So as I tell people, it's what's best for you and your company. But as you've had many of these discussions on this channel before, is that really, it boils down to the human factor, the communication factor, the transparency factor, and that I'm not scared, or I don't need to be scared by taking this issue up a next level. Or, I need to be able to say, I'm not bypassing you, my manager. I have total faith in you and for what it is that you're doing with us and our team. But, they need to know that something bad like this is happening,
yeah,
either now or in the future or in the past. And what do we learn from those tabletop events? And let's play devil's advocate. And if money was no option and we could do whatever we wanted, what would be some of the things that we do and fix? And what would be some of the things that we could, hopefully do in the future to be? We need to start having those kinds of conversations, not only with our user groups and our employees, but also with our vendors. Because a lot of the cybersecurity industry, just roll back to that for a minute, they look at what vendors now are involved, and they're like, well, you didn't have this company, this company, and this company protecting A, B, C, and D. So, and that's what that company does. And you didn't use anything like that, or even their competition.
or can I play even more devil's advocate? Someone I had
Oh,
on the
go
show,
for it.
I won't mention names because I don't want to get sued. But a CISO I had on Monday did name drop one particularly large firm, US based firm, I think as well, that begins with D and ends in ACE, and
Hmm.
basically said that their product just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I wonder, with the 3,612 products we have currently at my last look in this industry, how many of those are truly effective and how many of those are added
Right.
in to probably overly complicate existing, already complicated infrastructure.
And I've talked with people in the industry where it's like, we are 100% sole source dependent on this vendor. And I'm
Yeah.
like, then you really have a problem, because if they experience something, you're going to experience something. If they have a 0 day, you now have a 0 day. So it all builds into building that, what I call the 7 different layers of the system. You've got to build out something that's going to protect every single level at an ISO model down to the 0 level. So let's talk about the 0 level that most people have never heard of. The 0 level, especially if you're dealing with IT, doesn't really exist. You're dealing with level 1, right? If you're dealing in OT, operational technology, which is your SCADA-based systems, lighting, gas, water, these things have controllers or Siemens machines or ABB or whatever the brand may be. 0 level is the device level, the physical,
Yeah.
actual device level. So will eventually this spill over into IT? Yes. It's just a matter of time, to where we look at going, well, we were an HP shop or a Lenovo shop or whatever brand it is may be, at the zero level, that device level, is that device susceptible to attack? From either its BIOS, its video card, whatever software is put on it, its processor or whatnot. Because we've seen hardware get hacked all day long, over the past couple years.
Yeah.
So, if that's built into the device, that's going to be an issue with that device if it's plugged into, let's say, a nuclear facility, that that basically is monitoring and controlling, nuclear fissile materials. So, in the OT world, we're experiencing a huge, gigantic security shift. And it's been silent, and now it's becoming very vocal because we're starting to see outage at power plants. We're starting to see fuel dumps explode. We're starting
Yeah.
to see the crumbling, of our critical infrastructure in the United States.
Well,
Now, I've yelled and
you want to look at
yeah,
our 200-year-old rail track if you want to look at
yeah. I
crumbling
mean, I
infrastructure.
said this the last episode. We don't even have high speed rail in the United States. I mean, we just
No,
don't.
neither do
Could
we.
we? Absolutely. But it's the same. It goes back to this. We've got crumbling roads. We've got bad, dealing with, light poles that have been there 20, 30, 40 years, 50 years that,
Yeah.
have lines falling down, transformers that explode, that start, massive wildfires and kill people. In Texas, we had, since they self regulate their own power, they had a winter storm that killed, over 200 people. And this goes back to 2015 with me with Katrina, because I was there at Katrina, helping people, and volunteering, to help with a lot of the actual power, and trying to get the power back on, and working with. I was at the time working with an electrical company, and they sent me down there and they said, no matter what you can do is better than nothing, because everything's off right now. We're just trying to get everything back on. Since I worked with healthcare, they immediately sent me to hospitals, and I was like going, okay, the diesel backup generators now have salt water in them. We can't run those. Where are the power couplings? Do we have any battery backup power to the server in the no? I mean, all that's flooded. I mean, so DR and disaster recovery, I think since 2015, has not been on a lot of people's minds. When a natural disaster or an act by God actually happens, on how we're going to recover some of those things. Now, the federal government is the federal government, and we have this agency called FEMA that's supposed to help with some of those things, but still, if your town has all their power poles snapped, which I've seen, and the cables are now laying on the ground, how long is it going to take them to get the poles back up?
Yeah,
You
months.
know,
Yeah.
and if you only got 3 or 4 trucks, that are only that can only put so many poles in the ground a day, and you've got to wait on the federal government to come in and help do that, and then you've got to wait on the power company if they're a private, power company or a sub, contract, a subcontract come in. There's a lot of things tactically that have to be physically done to protect that infrastructure and physically protect that data. Now in the UK, y'all don't have a lot of light poles. Y'all bury y'all's cable. Here we don't bury cables that much. We run them from light poles only unless they're in major cities. We run them through tunneling and stuff like that. So it,
And you
I
say that
hope,
where we are in a rural location, I think the power poles that come to our house must be at least 80 years old.
yeah.
They come now and again and trim the trees. That's about as much as you get.
Yeah, and there's been many of instances where we've seen, during ice storms, especially, high voltage towers, the big ones that sit out in the fields,
Yeah.
get ice on the lines and get ice on, and they collapse down, and now you got a half a city or a whole entire area, that basically has no power, no backup power, no generation. Most people don't have generators, on their homes, or they don't have solar power to where they could use it off batteries. So, I've been preaching that for about a good 30 years. Some of the evil things can actually happen with
Well,
this.
what would be if you were that, I suppose, that state-sponsored attacker and you wanted
Mhm.
to attack the UK or the US? What part of the infrastructure would you hit?
So the first thing I have to look at is like, how are you generating power? In the United States, we have about 53 nuclear reactors. Most of them are actually, built and supported by one single company.
Yeah.
that builds most of the stuff that's inside there. So I go and I find all the weaknesses within that company, within the stuff that's actually out there. So I do reconnaissance for a while, normally between about a month and a half, on looking at how they're generating power, water treatment facilities, because water is a very important thing to actually have,
Yeah.
including with, not only with the power, sewage, how are they doing, how are they getting clean water. Then on top of that, though, too, is I look at the infrastructure of the physical location that I'm attacking. So, for example, when I was overseas, working with the government, can't go into a lot about it, but it was one of the things that we did was like, okay, this is a very small city, doesn't have the best infrastructure, it's got tons of weaknesses. Let's go find all the weaknesses within that area of that country before we launch an attack. So we could cut off the water, the power, the sewer. We could cut off, the clean water, everything like that. The whole, city area is now black, and now our troops can come in and do our attacks. Because guess what? If you got no power, I mean, no basic, utilities to be able to do anything. You're completely vulnerable.
You get after 3 days, you have chaos, is what you have. Yeah.
Yeah, you have complete anarchy.
Yeah.
So I've looked at that for many. I've written many a white paper, for government entities, and for power companies, sub power companies that do sub generation and also cogeneration of power for certain areas. About these are some of the vulnerabilities that lie within those systems, that you really have to look at, because guess what? An attacker would be able to get into, and cause this kind of havoc. Now, we had a water treatment facility in Florida to where, they were using TeamViewer on their admin computers, and someone gained access, supposedly, in theory, and was able to dump massive amounts of chlorine into the water. So,
God.
that turns into, well, a boil water notice, or you can't use water until we flush those lines out. So that takes time because, that someone or an actor had dumped massive amounts of chlorine into the water to where people couldn't even, they had to use bottled water for, days and days on end. Well, what if you're poor? What if you are, on
Yeah.
a limited income, or you're old and you can't get
Can't get to
out
the
and,
top. Yeah.
or you're handicapped, and you've got to go to a relief shelter to go get water because you can't use the toilet, you can't get anything out of the sink. You only have a limited amount of ice, that you can use, and then you got to boil water notice. So you might have to boil your water for a couple days. So I look at it like this: there's a lot of different ways, that you can look at this from a doomsday perspective, but I also look at it from like, what's fixable. What can, in these disaster like events, what can we learn, to be able to improve that response to help people, especially if there's like a flood, because after a flood, you don't have a lot of drinking water, because guess what? You've had a flooded
Sewage.
area that's flooded
Yeah.
over. And we've seen this here in the United States, and we've got people that are in certain states right now that are experiencing, 100-year floods,
Yeah.
that they've never seen before within a century, to where it's they get as much waterfall in a day as they get much in a year, so it's like, 14, 12, 14 inches, and then, that weather pattern, it moves. So guess what? The chaos travels with it.
I don't think we
So
can deny climate change anymore. That's for
we
sure. I mean,
can't. I
uh,
mean, that's just my own personal belief. Is
yeah,
like,
but
okay, the climate's getting warmer.
mine too. I mean, you look at the isolated here in the UK, but the UK this year has not been the UK. It's like living in part of Europe. The grass is brown. The
Yeah,
gardens are dead. I think the traditional English rose, if this carries on for another 5 years, we won't have English roses in the garden anymore. It's going to change. And you said it earlier, it's adaptability, isn't it? We're all going to have to change and amend
right.
things, I think.
I live in the South. I've lived in the South, the South and southeastern United States my entire life, and I've never seen it this hot. I'm over 40, and I mean I've experienced heat my entire life, and humidity. But this year, we've shattered records in the state that I live in. I mean, we've
Yeah.
just blown them out of the water. since like the 1800s. It's like it's never been this wet, this hot for this long with a drought period and all. It's like, and I tell people you can only put so much carbon in the air before things start heating up. So,
Yeah. I'm sure there's
but yet,
conspiracy theorists watching this who don't agree and think that
yeah, probably so. But I mean, it's like I told people too as well. We have to find a balance between where we can use, carbon based, utilities and appliances and vehicles, as well as using electric. Because I
yeah,
don't know if you've ever seen a copper mine. That's a pretty big damn hole in the ground,
very
that
big.
we've
Yeah.
drilled into the earth to get copper. Those batteries only have a life so long. There's a lot of toxicity that goes in those batteries and whatnot. And the other thing, though, too, is if Elon Musk today gave everybody in the United States an electric vehicle
There'll
and
be
we
no
all
power
plugged
to
them
run it.
in, yeah, and we all plugged them in that night, the electrical grid in the United States would melt within
Yeah.
24 hours. We don't have that much. We don't have that much infrastructure to be able to support 100% electrical
I
vehicles.
think that's because Musk has been in China making sure they got it over there because it's a bigger
Yeah,
market.
I mean, it doesn't matter if Ford, Lincoln, Mercury. I mean, whoever, any of the big automakers, GM. If they make electrical cars, first off, they're expensive.
They are. Yeah.
Not everybody can afford these damn things.
No.
you know and then on top of it, those batteries are only going to have a life of x amount of years, before they have to be
And then
changed out.
and then what happens with all those batteries? I mean,
Right.
these are a good example. So
Hmm.
this isn't a disposable one, but you've got a mass craze over here at the moment where people are using disposable vapes. So
Yeah,
they're
e-cigarettes. Yeah.
smoking one of these every day and then throwing it away. Well, in each one of these, there's a battery, isn't there?
Right.
I
And there's
just
also
wonder how much we're throwing away. Yeah,
a plastic vape cartridge that gets thrown into the ocean or into a
yeah,
landfill. So, and I'm not some tree hugging hippie by any means. I mean, I'm just looking at it from a logical perspective of our infrastructure would not be able to support a 100% electrical based, vehicle industry,
no,
train industry, or diesel electric industry, because, in the United States, everything is transported by an 18 wheeler,
yeah.
and that uses diesel,
That's right. You got
which is
Cybertrucks coming. It's fine.
right.
You thought of
you
that?
know, and I've told people, it's like, when we look at the shipping and the logistics industry, trains, 18 wheelers, trucks, bob trucks, stuff like that. I mean, the number one biggest consumer of gas in the United States is the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah,
Our mail carriers drive around in metal based trucks to deliver the mail.
yeah.
And the US government, and of all the facilities you would think of between the Navy, the Air Force, all these folks, the ones that chew up the most gas is, guess what? The USPS, the United States Postal
Can't
Service,
believe that. Well, I can
because
believe
they have to deliver
that.
the mail every day. That means they got to have gas in those vehicles everywhere. They're not electric yet. I mean, they're not, and it's the same thing, is that, we, as a mobile society, as we are here in the United States as well as in the UK, you're going to have to find a balance. There's got to be some kind of, balance between, as I tell people, carbon based, emissions, and then also
Yeah,
looking at electrical based things. Same thing when we look at our data centers. Data centers chew up a massive amount of power, Same thing with our battery backups, and they got
well,
diesel electric
we've been having
generators.
problems here in the UK because of the heat.
Yeah.
Because they haven't planned for that kind of heat in the
Yeah.
data centers here. So I think we're going to
Yeah.
see massive amounts of investment. Chip, I've just realised we're like 5 minutes over time.
Oh, that's fine.
We're gonna have to wrap things up, but I'm hoping we
Alrighty.
can do same again next week, same time, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely, and I think today we've covered a lot of topics that are in the industry that need to be talked about, and hopefully, as practitioners, and from us learning, and educating ourselves, and educating by ourselves by watching, definitely these podcasts, and having these debates, on how we're going to be able to protect our privacy, how we're going to be able to protect our intellectual property and our data, how we're going to be able to, protect our infrastructure, our collateral, what I call collateral, which is basically ourselves, how we're going to protect ourselves, as cybersecurity professionals as well as users, because I'm a user as well as you are.
Of course, yeah.
And then on top of that, though, too, is the environmental, stuff that we've also just talked about. How we're going to be able to involve that into eventually green data centers, and how we're going to do that into cooling those centers based around heat,
Yeah.
and we'll definitely pick this conversation back up again. And as I mean, today my phone has blown up. Like, how do I get off Twitter? How do I get off, Facebook? How do I get off
Well,
social
I'm
media?
sure that that story will still be as big when we catch
Oh,
up next week.
this, as I tell my wife, to be continued, because it's going to get ugly quick.
It is. There's plenty in the press at the moment to keep us entertained, and I'll finish off with Greg's comment about electric future. It's wishful thinking, which is nice as a thought. I think that's Gregor actually. I think you're based in Germany. The EU, as example, is just missing the basics for those alternative sources and making them reliable. And it's no different here in the UK. We're now reopening coal plants. I think we're now going to extend our nuclear facilities, which, in my humble opinion, is probably the quickest and cheapest way, most efficient way out of it. But obviously, there's issues around that as well, I'm sure. But again, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Chip, thank you for being an amazing guest as ever. And a quick pitch. Back tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 2 p.m. British Summer Time for the next episode of the CISO Experience, where I'll be joined by Garrett Smiley, who is the Group CISO for Serco. So looking forward to that one. It should be good fun. Gregor, thank you so much. Luther, everyone else who's tuned in, thank you. I'll play us out with a little intro for the CISO Experience tomorrow, and see you all soon.